Okay, well, we are at 7 p.m., so we will get started unless there's a reason to wait any longer. Any reason to wait longer, Mark?
No, we got enough for a quorum. If Randy comes, he can join the meeting.
All right, so we'll get started. We'll call to order the Town of Farragut's Visual Resources Review Board meeting for May 26, 2020. Again, we are doing this virtually for the second time, so we will run through this sequence of items and agenda assistance, I guess you would call it, that we have prepared that we used last month. We'll do that the same thing again this month. We'll call everyone by name when it comes time for a roll call vote for any of the different items. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. And I will go through and call everyone's name to ask if you have any comments or questions about the minutes as were presented. So let's start with Jeannie. Are you comments or questions on the minutes?
No, I don't.
All right. Cindy, any comments or questions?
Yes, I just wanted to know with the Pure Bar, did they decide what lettering they were going to use, whether it was going to be the red, or do you know, Mark?
I think they were going to use the red.
They did decide. Okay, all right. That's all I have.
I'll check, but I believe that's what I heard Bart say.
Okay, thank you.
Mm.
And let me add one other thing. When you're finished with your comments, please indicate that you are finished. We'll know to move on to the next one.
Oh, so just say I'm finished instead of thank you.
Hey, no, you were good. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thank you. I'm finished.
All right, thank you, Alderman Pinchot.
Alderman Pinchot passes.
Okay. Mr. Commercy, did you have any comments or questions?
None.
All right. And I see that we've been joined down by Miss Scott. Welcome. Did you have any comments or questions regarding the minutes from last?
No comments.
All right. I believe that I've made it through everyone that is present. So with that, we'll ask for a motion. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve by Cindy.
We have a motion to approve by Ms. Hollyfield. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
All right, we had a second by Ms. Stowe there, a little ahead of Mr. Commercy, so we'll go with that. All right, so we need to have a vote by roll call. And I guess generally that would be the Mr. Shipley asking doing the roll call vote.
All right. I assume we still don't have Randy Armstrong present. Is that right?
I do not see him on the list.
All right. We'll start with Cindy Hollifield. And just yes, no, or abstain is the answer here. So on the minutes, Cindy Hollifield.
Cindy, you're on mute.
Yes.
Okay. Kayvon.
Yes.
Marty.
Yes.
Alderman Pinchot.
Yes.
And Jeannie Stowe.
Yes.
Okay. Passes 5-0.
All right, that motion carries. So we will move on to the ground mounted sign applications. And we'll start, well, we only have one. So the Concord Liquor and Wine tenant panel at 153 Street. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Shipley for comments.
Yeah, this is out at obviously at the Kroger Marketplace development. The Cocoa Fit Club is moved out of their space, and Concord Liquor and Wine has moved in, and they're requesting approval for the tenant panel that's shown on your screen. It appears to be legible. The background is white to match the rest of the panels. There's a wine bottle there in the middle, obviously, that just to add a little logo or something to the panel. This panel is actually apparently 13 inches in overall height, so that's something good to keep in mind. As we'll talk a little bit about that with the sign ordinance itself later on. But the staff does recommend approval of this tenant panel for Concord Liquor and Wine.
All right, again, I'll go through each person and ask if you have any questions or comments. We'll start this time with Alderman Pinchot. Do you have any questions or comments for staff?
No, I have none. Actually, I just want to make a comment that I do like the sign. I think it looks good.
All right, thank you. Ms. Stowe, any comments or questions?
Is this the same liquor store that's inside of Kroger's now? Or is this another one?
No, it's another one. It's in its own lease space. It's outside of Kroger.
Okay, so it's not associated with Kroger. It's not.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. That'd be some competition between the Kroger liquor store and that one then. I think the sign looks fine. And that's all I have to say. I'm through.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Camarsi.
Sign looks good. I'm good.
All right, Ms. Holyfield.
I like the sign also. I'm fine.
All right, Ms. Scott.
I like the sign. No other comments.
Okay. I believe that's everyone that we have on here, so I think I've made my way through everyone. I concur. I think the sign is legible, and you know, it might be a little bit hard to read the Concord part, but I think everyone will get the point with the liquor and wine part. Should be hard enough. So pretty clear to me. So so with that, is there a motion on the sign?
Motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Mr. Camarsi. Is there a second on that motion?
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I do not see anyone else on this call. Is the applicant present, Mr. Shipley, that we need to hear from?
I'm not sure. I don't believe they are.
Okay. Do you have any comments from citizens that need to be read?
No, no, sir.
All right, with that, are there any amendments to the motion? All right, hearing none, if you will go ahead and conduct a roll call vote.
Okay, Cindy Hallfield,
Yes.
Kayvon Camarsi,
Yes.
Marty Lehman,
Yes.
Alderman Pinchot,
Yes.
Jeannie Stowe.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 5-0.
Okay, so with that, we'll move on down to item number 3 on our agenda, which is the review and recommendation of the ordinance 20-04, an ordinance to replace the town of Farragut's existing sign ordinance. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Shipley to make, I'm sure, will be a few comments.
Well, this is a lot of information, so I hope I don't bore you to death. Some of you may have attended the workshop training session that when I went through this for over an hour, going through how we got here and what's been changed or updated in the ordinance. It's a lot of information, and you know, when I get through kind of this overview, then we can go back through the very latest draft, which I have in Word, and I'll share the screen with that and show you where the last minute changes have been made for the planning commission's discussion last Thursday. They had a couple of minor changes to make to the ordinance. We actually, you all were invited to this, most of you attended. Back in April of 2019, we had the kickoff meeting for updating the sign ordinance, and like anything in government, it's taken a while to go through it, but it's a very important process, a very important document for the town, and we wanted to try to spend a lot of time on it. So we had a update committee that we formed. Dave Freeman was the representative for the VRRB. But we had a number of individuals that were on that committee from a variety of perspectives in relation to signage. And I think we got a pretty good, kind of a balance with the final result. We have, we had some people from the chamber and business community. We had some residents that were more interested in tighter sign regulations and things like that. So it's ultimately, it's a little bit of a compromise, but I think it was useful to go through the process. The committee actually met 8 times since April, and we had specific things at each of those meetings that we went through. The first rough draft was reviewed actually back in December. And then the ordinance that was emailed to y'all last week was the last version, and that's what we took to the Planning Commission last Thursday. So that's kind of an overview of that. Just an overview of the ordinance itself, what we were doing. If you remember, the main reason for revisiting our sign ordinance was to make it consistent with the Supreme Court decision back in 2015, which was involved, basically, it nullified sign ordinances that differentiated based on the content or the message on the sign. And in our previous ordinance, we had a lot of content-based provisions. So essentially, if you have to read the sign to know how it's being regulated, then it's probably in violation of the Supreme Court's decision. It would be unconstitutional if someone were to challenge the town on that basis. So that was the main thing we were trying to do with this update, was to take out any content-based provisions and make them essentially make the provisions based on physical characteristics like the height, square footage, the placement, illumination, the appearance. We can still do all those things, and those are completely within the Supreme Court's ruling. But while we were at it, there were a number of things that staff and probably you all have dealt with over the years that maybe needed to be clarified. And we tried to clean up some of those provisions. And we sent out, I think Bart sent out last week some illustrations that we've also been working on to show different, I guess different requirements in our ordinance and how that would work, like how you measure sign area and sign height, and what do the different types of prohibited signs look like. So things like that, and that will supplement the ordinance. It won't be part of the ordinance, but it will be something that will be available to the public as a supplemental document. Another thing for me was just making the ordinance easier to find things, so I really don't like ordinances that are just a huge amount of words and you can't really find out what you're looking for. So we tried to add a bunch of headings for each individual aspect of the ordinance so that people could find their way through the regulations, hopefully more easier to do that. So but one thing we wanted to do, we didn't want to completely just get rid of our standards with respect to sign regulation. We've always been, that's always been a very important component of the town and something we believe in strongly. So we wanted to keep, the provisions, the basic provisions that we've had for many years, but just, update them and make them constitutional. And then, also try to provide for provisions that would make signs look better, because that's really ultimately what we're trying to do is make them more effective for the businesses and make them more attractive for the community. So getting back to the initial main purpose again was to get rid of content-based provisions. And if you look in our old ordinance, or our current ordinance, I should say, on the left, you see the content-based provisions in red that we currently have. And on the right are read compliant provisions that basically just deal with the physical characteristics of the sign. So a temporary parcel sign, for example, could be a political sign, it could be a landscape award sign, it could be an environmental award sign, security system sign. It's more just, we don't care what's on the messages on the sign, but we do care how it looks, where it's situated, its size, height, and those kinds of things. As part of really updating the sign ordinance, one thing we wanted to do is make it the flow more logical. So we reorganized the sign ordinance so that the authority and the purpose is at the beginning of the ordinance, like it is with most ordinances that I'm familiar with. For some reason, that wasn't the case with our previous sign ordinance when it was recodified in Unicode. So that will make it a little bit easier to find your way through. Like I said earlier, just making section headings so you can find information more easily in the document. Some things that were really important for us to work on and make sure we spent some time on was really looking at our purpose statement, because that really establishes why you're doing this, and it gives you the legal justification for the provisions that are contained in the body of your ordinance. So we spent a lot of time with the committee on the purpose statement, and we kind of revamped that a little bit and specifically added in the purpose statement that we are not addressing content in this ordinance. That's something that we wanted to make sure was very clear in the purpose statement itself. And then we moved on to add a severability and a substitution section. Severability is basically if somebody sued the town and some aspect of the sign ordinance was found by a court of competent jurisdiction to be unconstitutional, then the whole ordinance is not rendered unconstitutional, just that aspect of the ordinance. So it's kind of a protection, a safeguard in the event that the town were challenged on some specific section of the ordinance. And then the substitution section is a provision that's been added specifically to help the town should someone, have a freedom of speech suit against the town. And that basically is anywhere you're allowed to have a commercial sign, you can substitute the message on that sign with a non-commercial message. So if I'm Discount Tires and I wanted to put UT football instead of Discount Tires on my sign, then that's fine. It doesn't have to be the name of the business. It can be commercial or it can be non-commercial. So it gives someone the opportunity to be able to display that kind of information, kind of a freedom of speech opportunity that we don't currently have in the ordinance. We went through and reworked a lot of the definitions, added a bunch of new definitions, clarified some definitions that we have. We added some clarifications in the administration section, and that's a lot of the stuff that you all deal with. like when the staff can consult with the VRRB, for example. I think now it's more kind of limited to just the definition of the sign. But we added in there that we could consult with the VRB whenever there's a question about architectural compatibility, which could include the illumination or just the physical appearance of any sign that we weren't really comfortable with approving at the staff level. We could always bring it to you all. We just wanted to make that more clear in the ordinance. And then a big change that we added is kind of a sea change with how we've dealt with signs historically. And that is to actually encourage developers, people that are building new projects to include the signage on the front end as part of their site and landscape plans, so that we can think about the locations for the signs and ensure that, plant material or utility structures or whatever are thought through in relation to the signage, so that it could minimize future conflicts. Because we have that happen a lot of times where the sign is kind of an afterthought, and someone comes in and, oh, where am I going to put this sign? I can't put it anywhere where it's going to be visible because of all these trees or because of the whatever, that's been placed in a location that wasn't coordinated with the signage on the front end. So we've added that in there. And then we've added some clarifications to the enforcement, appeals, and non-conforming sign sections. Not really a lot of changes there. But we did want it to acknowledge that we now have an electronic submittal process, which the current ordinance doesn't address that. General restrictions section is a section that we changed quite a bit. That's the section that talks about signs that don't require permits, prohibited signs, things like that. Historically, we've had a pretty long list of signs that did not require permits, and you got to be careful with that, because you're saying that some type of signs, can go through a less robust regulatory process than others, and you really need to be able to justify that and make sure that that's not based on content, like some of our ordinance is currently. So we lessened the types of signs that would not require a permit, and we added a lot of clarifications to prohibited signs. Signs that weren't really clear that they were prohibited, but we've kind of thought of them as prohibited, like these vinyl covers that go over a set of tires, for example. That just making it clear that that's actually not allowed. So things like that. Most of the prohibited signs that we've always had in the town historically are still prohibited. I mean, we still don't allow wind activated signs or vehicular signs that, are just sitting there in a very prominent location and being used essentially as a billboard. So, we really haven't changed that all that much. We just clarified some things that we'd been dealing with at the staff level to make it clear that those are or are not prohibited. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, in the general restrictions section, we established clear provisions for sign area determination, and then we'll have those illustrations that will be used to supplement that. This is an example of, like I was talking about earlier, signs not requiring permits, and you can see we've got 21 types of signs in the current ordinance that don't require permits, and many of those are content based, and that's a problem because we can't be doing that. So what I did on the right is an example of signs that don't require permits, but are completely content neutral. even flags, we don't specify that it has to be an American flag or a Tennessee flag. You can have a flag as long as it doesn't exceed a certain square footage and height and all that. And you can have the flag of Montana if you want at your house. It doesn't matter. So you can see that we've shortened that list, made it more, based on physical characteristics instead of message. So some examples of signs that don't require permits: real estate, election signs, traffic control signs, signs on the windows, down at the bottom. But the prohibited signs are still more or less prohibited. You got, like, obviously a dilapidated sign there, some feather flags, signs attached to poles, which are called snipe signs, vehicular signs, roof mounted signs, all those kind of signs are still prohibited in the ordinance. And then we talk about the sign regulations for the different land uses and zoning districts in the town. And this is really the section of our ordinance that contains most of the regulations. We had a discussion with the committee early on about whether they wanted to keep the same categories that we have in the current ordinance. And it seemed like those made sense and worked, so we just kept the same categories that we have now. And those categories include signs that would be allowed in all zoning districts, essentially anywhere in town. Those that would be more for residential properties. And then we have those for single use, non-residential, like a freestanding building, a JCPenney type development. Then the multiple use, non-residential, that would be more like your shopping centers. And then we had signs for specific uses that might have unique signage needs, like gas stations or drive-throughs. Because of their inherent characteristics, they have a little bit different signage requirements to function. So the first category in that large group is just those signs permitted in all zoning districts. We took out, again, content-based provisions and made them content neutral. And basically, it's pretty limited. I mean, it's going to be mostly your public safety type signs are going to be permitted anywhere. And some of the signs of a temporary nature, would be permitted on any properties in the town. And you can see here some examples. Flags would be allowed anywhere, traffic control signs, real estate signs, which would be a temporary parcel sign under this ordinance. And then the shop Farragut sign, again, another temporary parcel sign there on the lower right, will be allowed in any zoning district. Signs permitted on land for residential uses. We didn't really change much of the physical requirements that we have right now. The square footage for subdivision entrance signs, for example, all the physical parameters are still the same as they are in our current ordinance. We did add some clarifications for lighting standards, landscaping expectations, and then we just kind of reworded how some of the existing signs are phrased to make them content neutral. So, for example, a real estate sign becomes a temporary parcel sign. And actually somebody could put any kind of message on the temporary parcel sign. It doesn't have to be a real estate message. Because again, you got to think about just the physical aspects of the sign, not what is on the sign as far as the message. So these are some of the residential signs that we see frequently. What's currently called the residential construction sign, which advertises the project to maybe the builder, architect, whatever. And some of the other signs that you see in residential settings. The second large category was signs permitted on single-use non-residential. That's like your J.C. Penney, freestanding, basically commercial buildings, could be churches, schools. Again, most of those physical requirements have not changed. Added some clarifications, particularly on landscaping and lighting. And one thing that we did take a hard look at was our ground-mounted signs, which y'all have looked at for many years. And what we wanted to do is try to provide for language that would encourage people to build more attractive ground-mounted signs by ensuring that at least 2 feet of the base is going to be visible and it would be architecturally compatible with the building that the sign is associated with. So if you've got a brick building, then you've got a nice brick 2-foot minimum height base that kind of ties the sign better visually with the building. Because some of our current provisions, and we'll talk about this particularly with multiple tenant signs, because of the 6-foot height cap, you end up with kind of a big aluminum box with a tiny little base, and it really doesn't look like it blends in very well with the architecture of the building. But it's not really the fault of the applicant because they're restricted on the 6-foot height, but yet, they're trying to get as much square footage as they can. So it's something we changed. We added some clarification on compatibility. Again, we want to make signs that are even more attractive than we've had in the past and be very clear about compatibility expectations with all the signs that are permanent, basically. So this is a ground-mounted sign for a single use tenant or single-use building. And that, again, the size and all that, none of that's going to change. But the good thing about this sign is it's got that nice brick base that's very visible, and it's architecturally compatible with the building. So it ties the two together and makes for a better looking sign. And again, I'm not picking on any entities here, but this is another single use building where the base is really kind of lost in the plant material, and it looks like just a big black box, basically. So I'm trying to get away from that by providing for the opportunity for taller signs, especially for the multiple tenant signs. Another ground-mounted sign. Real estate signs were a little bit tricky to deal with because temporary is hard to really address in relation to a property being sold. Basically what we've done with those is consider them a temporary parcel sign, and each property owner would have the ability to have a temporary parcel sign, and then they could have, if the parcel is being offered for sale or property is being offered for lease, they could have an additional sign, and that would be your real estate sign. This is for the non-residential, and it would not be subject to the time limitation of some of the like shop Farragut temporary parcel signs that would be the other type of temporary sign that you would see on commercial properties. But they would have to be removed 2 days after the property is sold or leased or whatever your advertising has concluded. And it gives the sign administrator in this language the authority to basically question the applicant if we believe that the property is clearly sold, but yet the sign's still there. They're going to have to prove to us that it's still active and it's not sold, or they'll have to remove it. So we added that language in all the sections that deal with temporary signs. Some other things with the single-use non-residential. We tried to go in and clarify wall-mounted signage, particularly compatibility, as again, we're trying to make the signs look good and compatible with each other and with the building. Something we have added as a new sign in the ordinance is the interior accessory sign, and that's a sign that really you couldn't see from a public street, but once you get into the property, at least 60 feet in from the property line, someone would have the ability to have a small, tastefully done sign that could put whatever message you want on it. It could be a directional type sign or deliveries, a certain direction for deliveries and that kind of thing. So it just gives a property owner an extra sign that they don't currently have. We also simplified window signage. Currently, we have some provisions in the ordinance that talk about temporary window signs, and they can only be up for 30 days. But there's no way that you can really adequately monitor temporary window signs. So what we did was we basically just said we have a physical requirement for window signs, and it doesn't really matter how long they've been up there, but it can be 25% of the window face or 20 square feet, whichever is less. So, if you had a big, long building with a lot of windows, you still would be held to 20 square feet. So again, just addressing the physical aspect of it and making it really something that's enforceable, because the whole idea of regulating window signage is so that people don't just, cover up their windows with a bunch of signs and it just kind of ends up looking tacky and you can't, it's just not a good look. So we tried to deal with that. And that does not require a permit. We just would verify that they meet the physical requirements of the ordinance. We also provide for a building frontage sign, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute, but it's basically just a little sign out in front of a business that is typically something like a sandwich board type sign. It's not going to be visible in public streets. People already do it anyway. It can't be anything that's wind activated, but we just kind of acknowledged what we're seeing businesses do, and it gives them an extra opportunity to maybe, advertise a sale or some event coming up in a way that really can only be seen by someone that's at the front of the building, a pedestrian. We modified interstate pole signage a little bit. It's still basically the same entities that have interstate pole signs can keep those signs. It doesn't really affect them. So here's wall-mounted signs on a corner lot. That's something that we have addressed in the ordinance to be a little bit more clear. Large developments that have a lot of frontage. Basically, we kept the same provisions that we have right now for those. This is called right now it's a directional enter-exit sign, and the fancy language that I call it now is a peripheral freestanding accessory sign. So you can put whatever message you want on that sign, but you just have to make sure it meets the physical requirements of the ordinance, the height, the square footage, the placement. But you don't have to put enter and exit, because again, we don't want to tell you what you put on your sign. We just care about the physical aspects of it. And this is that freestanding store frontage sign that I was talking about. This happens to be in front of JCPenney, which hopefully will reopen here soon. But that's a sign that they had out. And really, nobody can see it from Parkside Drive. It's something that gives them an opportunity to advertise something that they don't currently have the ability to do. Interstate interchange pole signs, I'm sure y'all are familiar with those. We've got a map that we created as a supplement. I think it was in the illustrations that we emailed to you all that shows where is the interstate interchange, and then the properties 200 feet beyond that would have the opportunity for this type of sign. Ball field signs, basically we say there for all non-governmental ball field signs, as long as we can't read the sign from an adjacent property or street, then it doesn't really matter to us what is on the sign, what message is on it. And then flags, we have provisions for those. Multiple use buildings, that's going to be your shopping centers. Again, most of the same things that we did for the single use non-residential, we did for the multiple use. One thing that we added in here, because as you all deal with a lot of times tenant panels, where you've got a lot of tenants, you typically have a development that probably has a fair amount of frontage. So for those developments that have at least 400 feet of frontage, we're giving them the opportunity to have two 40 square foot signs instead of one 60 square foot sign along that 400 feet of frontage, as long as they're 150 feet apart. So that gives them really a net of 20 extra square feet to add more tenant listings if they choose to do that. So hopefully that will help with some of the bigger centers, because smaller centers don't typically have a whole lot of tenants. So it's not quite as big of an issue. We have increased the maximum allowable height to 20 inches. And the main reason for that is to allow for a more visible base that would tie architecturally the sign better to the building I was talking about earlier. That's the only physical change that we've made to our existing ground mounted signs in terms of the size. The size is still capped at 60 square feet. And then the height has been increased from 90 inches to 110 inches. And that counts the address area, which is 18 inches of space above the permitted height. And all that's based on the setback of the sign too, as you see in the ordinance. So here's a multiple tenant sign, and these have always been a challenge. Yeah, I know when I was staffing the VRRB for a long time, we struggled with some of these, and it's tough to get in these rather small spaces. It's sometimes tough to get a effective message in there, and then you got all these other tenant panels that you're competing with, and unless you're at a traffic signal and stopped, you're probably not going to be able to read most of those at one time. So that's something in our ordinance has not necessarily solved that issue, but we have given people the opportunity for two 40 square foot signs instead of a sign like this, 60 square feet. And then we've also added, and just as a guide, that the minimum height of a tenant panel it would be 8 inches, and that's really a minimum. So this is probably more like 10-inch panels there on that side. Here's another example, and you can see the base of these signs. Some of these, like this one, you really don't see the base very much. It's mostly just, it's not a bad looking sign, but it's mostly just the element of the sign face. Same way with this. This is a nice looking sign, but you don't really have any of that base visible. And then Village Green, another one. Here's a sign that kind of gets at what we're trying to encourage with sign design, and that is to show more of that base, to tie that brick, in the case of this development, to the building. So they've kind of done that in a neat way with that side panel. Some other provisions, let's see if there's anything new. We did add some building frontage sign and projecting sign provisions for our mixed-use town center and mixed-use neighborhood areas, because those are really pedestrian focused. And we wanted to give businesses in those areas the opportunity to have like a sign that projects over the pedestrian way so people can see they're walking down the sidewalk, which businesses are coming up. So that's a change that we added in there. Multiple use buildings with a single access point, we have made that more flexible in the sign ordinance. Up to this point, basically the way you would deal with a building like this, which has one public entrance, is you take the width of the building, and let's say it's 75 feet, you have a sign area of up to 75 square feet, which all the signs would have to fit within. So the space in between the signs gets counted toward that square footage. What we have changed that to is you got that same 75 square feet. Well, they can apply the signs in different parts of the building, and they would be calculated separately. So you could have 3 25 square foot signs that could be spread out across the front of the building, and you wouldn't be counting that space in between those signs. And it just gives someone potentially the opportunity to have a better looking signage presentation on the building if they choose to take that approach. So compatibility, we deal with this a lot. Wall mounted sign compatibility, we really try to be clear in this ordinance what we mean by that and what we expect in terms of compatibility. It's not that you can't have your own style, your own font, but we do want to, when you look across the center, for it to have kind of a general consistency. I mean, here you got black and white letters, but if you look at it as a whole, it has kind of a general flow. In some of our older centers, like in Village Green, we have a provision that we added in the ordinance to try to, over time, establish a theme for wall-mounted signs. And that would be something the town would work with the property owner on. We'd talk with them about, what kind of signs would you like to, what kind of theme would you want in the future for tenants as they come and go, what type of sign? And then basically once that's decided, and it would come through you all for your recommendation, then as tenants transition in these older centers, they would have to follow that new sign theme that was established by the owner and the VRRB, working together so that we don't continue with kind of a hodgepodge that never really gets resolved, because, you look at that and you say, well, I don't know what type of sign I want to put out there, because there's like 3 or 4 different styles. So just establish a certain style, run it through the VRB, make sure that's a look that we want, and then from that day forward, all the other wall mounted signs would have to follow. These are just some accessory signs. This is one of those freestanding building frontage signs in the mixed use town center area, which the French Market is. This sign is very helpful. It doesn't block the sidewalk. They take it down at the end of the day. So we, instead of saying you can't do that, like we do in our current ordinance, we're saying you can do it. We want you to do it. I mean, it makes for a more active streetscape, more lively, energetic, and we want to be encouraging that in the town center area. Here's some other examples of the kind of signs that we would want to encourage in the town center. These little projecting signs that they're small, but they still give you kind of a nice look. And then finally, the other provisions in the ordinance, which we didn't change a lot, dealing with some of these unique type of entities that we have, banks and drive-throughs, gas stations, things like that, the Tenova Hospital Complex. Those all have very unique kind of signage needs in order for their businesses to conduct business properly. And really, when we look through this, the current provisions, they don't say that you have to have a certain message on most of the signs that are currently provided for these entities. So it's not really content based. So we're more or less retaining those in the draft ordinance. And all that has been looked at. I talked with the town attorney last week about the sign ordinance, and he felt like there was nothing in there that he couldn't defend. He thought it was fine, and you know, we did address the content aspect of the ordinance. So I think everything's good in that regard. So again, just gas stations, you know, they have some unique signage needs that you wouldn't typically see with some of the other uses. And of course, the hospitals have some very important, unique signage needs that we basically didn't change that. So that's about it as far as just an overview. I just wanted to kind of give you all some background on how we got here. And I'm going to go ahead and, does anybody need to go back to any slides before I get out of this?
Well, I think we need to go through and ask for questions and comments. Would that be correct, Mark? And they may need to reference a slide at that time. Okay,
and I've got the actual marked up ordinance that I could bring up on the screen if that would be better. Whichever one. That's a lot of information. I know that I just went through, and I don't mean to overwhelm you, but I felt like it was important to give you some context on how we got here. It's been, you know, a pretty lengthy process, and we've put a lot of work into it to get to this point. But I wanted y'all to kind of understand the main objectives of what we're trying to do and some of the bigger changes that we're proposing. But yeah, if anybody has any specific questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
All right. Well, let me go through here, and I'll call everyone, and they can make their comments or ask their questions. So to start with, Ms. Hollyfield, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
May I start?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, you said you had the packet. I think on page 3, I wanted to, well, a few things I need to ask you. What does this interior accessory freestanding sign mean? It means a sign permitted interior to a development and not meant to be readable from a public street, public access.
It's basically the sign I was talking about, where you come into the property and you may come to a decision point area is typically where I see this sign being used. And it may have, you know, information that you would only need to know if you're in the property. It's not designed to be read from Kingston Pike or Campbell Station Road. It's basically when you're in there, there might be a sign that says to the right is, you know, C. Penny, to the left is Belk. And the sign has to be architecturally compatible with the materials on the building. So I mean, it can't just be a stuck in the ground sign, which actually is what we see a lot. So what I did was, it's kind of like people we used to do in graduate school. We would watch where people would walk. We wouldn't put any sidewalks in on some of these projects until we watched people where they walked, and then you kind of saw the patterns, and then that's where you put your
Uh-huh.
sidewalk. We're doing the same thing with the signs. We've seen where people are using signs. They obviously have a need for it. It's not really visible from the public streets. So what we're trying to do is make them, all right, you're going to use a sign like this. Let's make it look good. So just provide for it instead of saying you can't do it, and then they sneak around and put these little in the ground signs and hope they don't get caught.
Right. Okay, the second question I have is this, I like the sandwich signs, or what's the official wording of the ones that have like the little, like today's menu is on the outside? What is that you're going to call that?
That's a freestanding building frontage sign.
Freestanding, it's over here somewhere. Freestanding building. Oh, I got it. Okay. So,
Yeah.
my problem, I think they're great. However, if a lot of, number one, they're allowed every day, correct? They're going to be allowed
Yes.
every day, but they have to take them in at night.
Yep.
Okay, because like if a storm, stuff like that. Okay,
That's right.
that was
That's
the one question. So I have an issue, or not issue, but that needs to be brought up. The other is placement, because if you're walking down like a little street and one puts it one like closer to the door, and
Yeah.
then another puts it another place, you're going to be as a pedestrian or a person that we're going to be weaving or zigzagging. Has that been discussed as far as actually where to place them? So how far away from the door or something like that?
Well, it does say in there in the section in the ordinance itself that it has to be within 10 feet of the front of the building.
Okay.
And it can't block the sidewalk. So another provision that we added in the ordinance is in order to qualify for that sign, at least in the mixed use town center, mixed use neighborhood, you have to have a sidewalk that's at least 8 feet wide.
Okay, thank you. All right, it has to have, okay, so you said 10 feet from what now? Has to
From
be
the
10
front of the building. It has to be within 10 feet of the building.
of
Because
the
again, it's not a
building.
sign, it's not oriented to be visible from really for a car. It's more for somebody that's near the building.
And the sidewalk has to be 8 feet.
Sign. Yeah.
Okay, well, that would be, you know, I'm looking at accidents is the reason I was doing that. And the last question I think I have is, okay, I agree with you as far as the base of the ground mounted signs, but like some of those, I mean, it does look much better, but do they do that because they think they're penalized for their actual signage? Is that why that they do the smaller base?
Let me see here. Let me
Like,
see if I can pull up one here.
yeah, you had back because there was one in particular. It was great, but it was so the bot like that. That one's not bad. There was another one. Keep on
Well,
going
I
back.
tell you, just in looking at this sign here, the challenge is right now, the ordinance says you can't, the sign, other than the address part, can't be
Right.
more than 6 feet in height. All right, well, then it allows you to make a 60 square foot sign.
Yes.
So you've got a 10-foot wide by 6-foot tall sign. So you don't have any place, any physical space
For the
that
bottom, the base. Right. And see, that's
what we're
what,
trying to do. We're
Yeah.
saying now you have to start with a base, and that base has to be a visible 2 feet of base.
okay. So
And
it's,
then whatever you got beyond that is going to be your sign face area.
so they're not going to be penalized with that, or
That's
I
right.
guess they are or not.
No, they're not. They're going to
Okay,
get they're going to get an extra 20 inches of height
Okay.
than what
And
we have
the
right
last
now.
question I have is, so, you know, most of the things grandfathered in, this, that, and the other. If some, after you've changed your plans, it's okay for some of these stores to say, hey, I want to go back and do my sign over again. They're okay to do that. I mean, you know, like say Costco or any of the others, if it benefits them now, whereas it did not benefit them before, they can go ahead and,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
If the ordinance passes and they comply with the new ordinance, or they can comply, then they should submit an application and take advantage of it. like I said earlier, I think the sign ordinance is a balance, and I can see all perspectives and putting this together. And it's important that as a whole, this is a little bit more of a business-friendly ordinance than we have right
Yes,
now. And that's, to
absolutely.
me, is a good thing, because businesses are what we rely on in the town. And so we're trying to, without just, saying you can just put whatever you want to up, we want to keep the basic provisions that we have, but give them some extra things that they don't currently have the opportunity to do.
Okay, thank you, and I pass.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. Camarsi, do you have any questions or comments?
I pass. It makes sense. I pass.
All right. Alderman Pinchot, questions or comments?
Comments. First of all, I want to compliment Mark on spearheading and managing this whole process over the past year. You did a fantastic job, and I compliment you on your patience. But good job. I have no other comments.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Stowe?
Well, I'm like Ron. I can only imagine how many hours you must have put into this, Mark. And I think your summation just now is excellent. I mean, it's not something that I necessarily would need to understand, but you make it easier to understand the way you presented it. So thank you for that. And I have no other questions.
All right, Ms. Scott, any questions or comments?
I have no comments.
Okay. All right, well, I have just a couple things I'd like a little bit of clarification on that I tried to read through and maybe I missed it. So in talking about, again, going back to the base height and the overall height, and we're looking at a sign here that's a multi-tenant sign. Does that apply both to the multi-tenant and the single-use non-residential property?
No, it doesn't. It applies to the multiple tenant, because the problems that we've had on the base issues has always been with the multiple tenant signs. The single tenant signs, like the Wendy sign that we looked at, because they don't have a lot of information, they can get, what they need to convey with their 40 square feet. And they don't get penalized for that. They got the 2 foot, and then, they can have 40 square feet above that. But it really was targeted toward the multiple tenant signs like you see on the screen there, and trying to figure out a way to give them some extra height so that they can still have as many tenants as they can get on their sign, but make the base a little bit more visible.
Okay, so on a single-use property, non-residential, what is the overall height allowed
It's the same as it is now, 6 feet.
with the base included? And that is in the, and
That's
when,
right.
when I was going through the regulation itself, I was trying to find where that is written. Do you know where it is in the actual regulation?
Yeah, let me see here. But a sign like that, the top, from the ground to the top, is 6 feet with a 2 foot visible base. Because those haven't been historically a problem. Let me see if I've got. It's under the sign area and setback determination section. It's page 15 of the actual ordinance. And it's really based, like it is right now, it's the sign area is based on the setback from the front property line. And
All right, so I'm looking at the one that has the red line copy. You're saying it's on page 15 of that?
oh, no, that would be the actual ordinance.
Okay.
I don't know what.
Maybe that's where I'm missing it. So
If you look under the section under primary permanent ground mounted sign, the height would be addressed under the height and addressing section of that. So the maximum height of a primary permanent ground mounted sign for a single use development is 6 feet. That's the same as it is now. The
All right.
only thing it has added is that we've added the requirement for the 2-foot base.
Well, but you've added the requirement for the 2-foot base on the multi-tenant property, not the single use.
Both, it's on both. Yeah, it's on both.
That's where I was confused from earlier. So
No, it's on all
multi-tenant-
ground-mounted signs. All of them have to have the 2-foot visible base. Yeah,
okay, that's what I was trying to ask earlier. So
that's right.
both of them have to have a 2-foot visible base.
That's right.
The overall height has not changed for this use.
That's right.
Look
6
at
feet.
now at the Wendy's.
So they could go 4 feet above the top of the base on a sign like this if they were at a 20-foot setback, 4 by 10. And a 4 by 10 is really a very big sign for just one entity.
So would that effectively provide that in a situation like Wendy's, that their actual sign that says Wendy's would be less than what is allowable in the current ordinance?
It would depend on its setback. It probably would be the same for that. I think that sign is actually only maybe 12 feet from the front property line, so the face area is not as large as 40 square feet because it's closer to the street. So it shouldn't really affect a sign like that. In fact, Wendy's is, it's got that base on it, and it would be, it would be fine with these provisions. This would really deal with new signs that are being constructed, that they would have to have the 2-foot base on those signs.
Well, that was just my concern, is that a new constructed sign today under the proposed regulation,
Yeah.
sign face would actually be allowed less than what is allowed today because of the 2-foot requirement for the base.
Yeah, that could be the case for a single use. Yes. Yeah, that's about the only area where there could be a little bit of a reduction, depending on how they arrange the base. But this one here has a 2-foot base, so it wouldn't really affect it. But,
Well, that is one concern I have with this proposed change, because I think that we already hear that the overall square footage allowed even for a single use may not be as large as some tenants would prefer. So I have a concern that we're not allowing for something to provide them with equality to what they have today. Makes sense.
that makes sense. I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, may I, or Mark, that was what I was talking about with the grandfather. This is a perfect example, because I'm with you, Marty. Right now it's grandfathered in, but if they chose to just say that, I use Costco, but this is a perfect example. They're grandfathered in, so they don't have to do anything, even if it didn't meet the standards like you guys are preparing for the future. But if they chose to, they could go ahead and do that. But I mean, this sign is great, but I'm like you. I think it's going to it's going to hurt some businesses. Is it not? Like, if for I mean, I like the idea that the base is so large. And
I am in agreement with the idea of making the base more prominent. I agree with that.
Let's see what.
Yeah.
I don't want to penalize the actual sign face period.
exactly.
Well, I'm still confused. I need to ask a question. I'm looking at Wendy's sign, 2-foot base. Does that mean that it's only 4 foot of the actual sign when you put in the 2-foot base? Or are you looking at a 6-foot sign plus a 2-foot base? I'm confused now.
Yeah, it would be a 4-foot tall sign base above a 2-foot base, overall 6 feet. And what Marty's talking about is, and I understand what he's talking about. I thought about that when I was going through this, but I was thinking, I started looking around the town and I didn't really see any single-use developments that were a real problem with that. It was more of just the multiple tenant ones is where we ended up with having these tiny little sliver of bases. But I can revisit that and see, based on setbacks, if we can allow them a little taller sign to acknowledge the base requirement that we're proposing here. And I can send that back out to you all and let you take a look at it, because I understand what you're talking about. That's why we didn't change it in the first place, is because it wasn't really an area that, again, you could have 40 square feet for just one entity. You think about it, and then you got 60 square feet for 10 entities. So that was kind of the logic there, is to allow the multiple tenant ones to go higher because of how much signage they're representing on their face area.
I understand the logic, and I think it's good to help the multi-tenants, but I also don't want us to get comments later on that the single-use tenants were then penalized for that decision. So I believe if you could revisit that, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
That was
Yeah.
that was a great point to bring up, Marty.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good
Couple
point.
points of clarification. I want to make sure that I understand again. On the houses of worship and the gasoline stations, that sort of thing, in the past, they've had a changeable copy option. Is that still in here, or did that go away?
Well, gas stations have changeable copy because that's essential to the function of what they do. But we did have to take that out with schools and churches because it basically gave them some signage opportunities that other entities didn't have the ability to have. And most of them don't really use it currently anyway. But that is something that, because of the content regulations, we had to basically take out anything that gave preferential treatment as far as, an entity that has a different allowance of a message because of who they are and what the message was saying.
So in the case of a school, or a school that's owned by a governmental entity, they could keep a changeable copy, but if it were a private school, they would not be allowed?
Well, if it's Knox County, we don't regulate that anyway. We never have.
Okay.
So, it's one of those things that if they do it on their property, then we can ask them to comply with their requirements, which we have in the past, and they have brought signs to us before in the past and gotten approval. But something like that, if they wanted to do it, they could do it.
All right. And then a little bit of a clarification on the residential side of things. You can have that small permanent parcel sign. I think it says it's 2 square feet, possibly.
Yeah, that's to be mounted on the house.
That can be a sign on an individual residence.
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
And that sign could be anything.
Yes. As long as it's not immoral as defined by the Constitution.
Right.
We actually allow that now. It's called a general occupant sign, but we allow it now. You can put whatever message you want to on your house as long as it's not more than 2 square feet.
So if you put the street number of your address on your house, is that part of this, or is that separate from that?
That really wouldn't be part of it. I mean, first of all, we wouldn't really get involved with that anyway. It's never, to my knowledge, I've never had an issue with a general occupant sign on a house. And most people will put the address numbers, tasteful on their homes. But that wouldn't really be considered a permanent parcel sign. That would be more of a a code required sign that's exempt from the ordinance as long as it's building and fire code size requirements that we have for whatever use they're associated with, generally up to 6, 8 inches in height for those. But really what that plaque sign is for is like if you had a, beautician shop in there, or if you wanted to have the name of your family or something, you could put a plaque on the house. And again, it's something that it really has never been an issue. The only reason we've kept it in there is that it helps with a First Amendment assertion that maybe people don't feel like they have the opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights, and they can do that by using that 2 square feet on their house if they want to. They also have the opportunity to have the temporary parcel sign, and that doesn't really restrict what the message is either.
Is, if you live in a neighborhood, does the neighborhood have the ability to write a bylaw or regulation that would prevent or trump the ordinance that we have here related to residential signs?
Well, and they do that now. They can do that, but I think somebody could challenge a private covenant on a First Amendment assertion. It's a lot of homeowners associations are very strict on political signs. Like, we don't allow any in our subdivision, which I think is great because I don't want to know what somebody's politics is that lives next to me. So it's something that homeowners associations we don't really get involved with that. If they want to say you can't do certain things, then they can do that. If somebody challenges that, then they're going to have to prove that it's constitutional.
All right. Just a couple more things. If you wouldn't mind to explain a little bit more about the athletic fields. I know you put up one picture there, but so you're talking about a private athletic field that's not a governmental, not a school.
That's right.
What are you saying there about the signage on those fields? Any type of sign, or are you just talking about the scoreboards, or?
If it's not, scoreboards, signage, any of that, if it's not visible from a public right of way or adjacent property, we don't regulate it. It's not really regulated by the sign ordinance.
But if it is visible, so are we talking about, I mean, if you had a ball field or a baseball field, softball field, where the sign was in the outfield was near the public street, but the sign faced back toward the field itself so that the street didn't see it saw the back of the sign only, didn't see the illumination of the sign. Are we talking about that's allowed, or would that not be allowed just because the sign's visible?
It wouldn't be allowed if the sign itself is visible from the public right of way or adjacent.
Okay. So on those type of private ball fields, they would have to find a way to shield the sign.
A scoreboard is currently considered a sign. It's not considered a sign in this ordinance.
Oh, okay.
The scoreboard is just, that's not something but if you got Coca-Cola out there or whoever on the scoreboard, then that is considered an advertising device. But just a scoreboard is not really, I don't know why we consider it a sign in our current ordinance, because it's not really a sign. That's just basically something that shows what the score is of a game that's being played on the field.
Okay. Well, I thought I saw a scoreboard on your picture earlier, and that's why I was curious.
Yeah, that was showing like a Coca-Cola display.
Because it was on the scoreboard.
Yeah. So those, just try to orient it. If you're going to do that, try to orient it where you can't see, unless you're at the ball field.
Okay. And then my last question is, what date right now do you expect this ordinance to become a regulation or be passed?
Well, it probably will go through the planning commission for a vote next month in June, and then probably will go to the board in July or August. So hopefully by the end of August, it'll be finished.
Okay. So then from our perspective tonight, we obviously have this question about the single-use commercial property and the 2-foot base and all that. Do
Yeah.
we need to take any other action tonight as far as a vote on this that we would approve, or do we need to wait until there's a revision there?
It's really whatever y'all are comfortable with. If you want to, make a recommendation of approval of the ordinance with subject to the staff coming up with some language